Oh, well, I believe we could work out a deal. So I just sold him my horse. And I made a deal to keep the horse for him. And I made a deal to pasture him, get paid for feeding him, for saddling him up every morning. And by golly, he'd come in at 10 o'clock and I thought it was beautiful. I did that 6 times. And it just worked like a charm. And then one day, I couldn't believe these nice people would do something to a nice man like me. That they would do such a thing that they did. But, they got to sitting around the pub one Saturday night, and they got to drink a little beer, and you know how that is. You get to feeling good, and they got to boasting about how fast that horse could run. And then one of them said, well, I'll bet my horse can outrun yours. Oh, I'll bet he can. The next thing I knew, they was going to have a horse race on Sunday. Oh, my gosh. What was I going to do? That's called a run on the bank. Well, at first I thought, man, I just better take this horse and leave town because I knew he was on the horse and I knew he was the fastest one. And I thought, I sure hate to give up this racket. There's got to be some way to solve this so I can keep this racket going because I'm doing pretty good at this deal. But one day I thought, I'll go see my friend the legislator. And I'll say, I'll finance your next campaign if you'll just pass a law that you can't race horses and gamble on Sunday. Now you see how the rich boys control the legislature?
No.
Who can put up $1 million to $5 million? What is it? $10 billion now for elections every 2 to 4 years?
Right.
6? Who possibly could have that much money? Years after years after years. The guy gets all the money for nothing because he don't loan anything and gets interest on it. God, that's got to be a good racket. I just wish my granddad had thought of it. That's not exactly true. And then he goes on to say, you may want to know whether the bank is the one getting the benefit of new money. Since the bank owns the new money while the customer has merely borrowed the money, the bank does indeed get the benefit. And they do get most of the benefit. We get all the hard work. They get all the cash. And we just go back and borrow some more from them. And if you do really well in your lifetime, and say, for example, I buy a house and it goes from $25,000 to $100,000, man, I look good. But really, all I did is just transfer the debt to the next generation. Because I guarantee you, they know how it's going to be worth that much more after it's 40 years older than it was when I started, can it? It's impossible. They wear out. You ever notice that? Even a house kind of wears down, doesn't it? Then how can the value keep going up unless there's something going wrong? But see, the reason it keeps going up because the bankers have to have the value increase or they wouldn't ready to run out of loaners. It's really this simple once you understand it. And I guarantee you, I didn't have a beer one day and this all come in my head. I spent 28 years of my life doing this and trying to explain it to people running around. You look like you got a question.
Yeah, just have a disconnect on the Federal Reserve. So, how they connect up with the banks, a private bank. So, in other words, like the Federal Reserve creates $1,000 out of thin air. They give it to the Treasury. The Treasury gives them a bond that pays interest. But then there's this $1,000.
Well, let's talk about that a little bit. First place, the Federal Reserve creates very little money itself. Maybe a little more in the last year or two than they have. But basically, they don't create any money except the reserves that go to the banks. And let's talk about that a little bit. Because I think you might find this interesting, being you asked the question. Because what you're right is, now they do the exact same thing. When they buy a bond, the Treasury issues a note. And that's basically what it is. They, as the United States government, signs for you and I a promissory note. Only they call it a bond, but it's really just a promissory note. Get my P before me in here, and they call it the bond. And now that goes on the books of the bank as an asset, and the bank then turns around and says, "Okay, we create these money, put it in the checking account of the government, and bango, you've got brand new money just like that." Then they say, when that there gets that, and I got it right out of this book, that then that thing goes 4 places. It gives the banks, the private banks, the Federal Reserve private banks, and remember, there's a dual-form banking system here in the United States. We have a state-chartered, state-ran, state-regulated banking system, and we have a federally chartered, federally regulated banking system that we all only think about, and that's the Federal Reserve System. But see, those laws only apply to the federal banks, not to the state banks. The state banks do the exact same thing, but they're chartered and controlled by state law. And there's a real reason I want to stress that, but get into it later. Okay, so now they say this goes into the bank. They sell that this actually don't happen like this right away. First off, there's lots of misinformation in all of this, okay? Because basically there are 25 bond dealers that always buy these bonds first. And nobody ever says where they get the money from. They probably create it on their books too. And then when the Fed wants to increase the money supply, they buy these bonds from these bond dealers. Now the bond dealers can buy these bonds two different ways. They can create brand new money just like this, or they can gather up somebody's already borrowed money. You could not start this system the way it runs now, like from scratch. It couldn't be done. The reason they was able to do it, trick us so well, because we started out where we had some actual something that was called money, gold and silver coins, tobacco leaves, musket balls, furs. Any of these things have been declared legal tender in the United States at one time. So this could give us a start. So then I could promise to pay, we'll say, 1 ounce of silver or 10 beaver pelts or I don't know how many pounds of tobacco. I don't know just how to draw tobacco either. One thing I'm not is an artist, I guarantee you. The only thing I'm good at is my mind's good at this stuff. I'm really not as good at anything else. I wasn't too bad a horse rider, but that's neither here nor there. Okay, so now this thing goes in, and they never tell us about where the bond dealers get the money, all that, and I'm not really concerned about it because it's just the principles of how it functions that we really have to understand. Okay, then they say this money then goes into the bank of the bond dealer as a reserve for that bank. This same money goes into the checking account of the bond dealer so he can spend it again or buy another bond. And it also goes someplace else, and I can't remember. I'll have to go back and read it. It's all in my new book, Modern Money Secret, written right out of this textbook. So I got my information. And so that's how it works. Now, when these banks get this, they say that they can hold 10% of that, and they can then loan. You don't mind my stopping a second, do you? No, I got to get something out of my briefcase because I want to really show you this, and I want you to pass it around. I want to get this because I have this chart. I'll just take this over. I have these yellow slips that I'd be willing to give you when I get through here. That it's a compilation of my research for all this time, at a couple pages here. And I have some that's a little larger, and I'll get into that in a moment too. But this was one I was looking for. Now, this was a chart that given to me by this guy, an attorney for the Minnesota Department of Commerce less than 2 weeks ago. And he makes it very clear, and I like to use his chart because it's probably the simplest one I've ever seen. And he starts out with the same thing. And he says, here, and this is how it works, only it don't work this way either. There's a lot of misinformation here once you start to get it. But let's go through it, and I'll show you why it's misinformation, but let's go through the first. He said we start out with $1,000 in the first bank. And when I asked him where the 1,000 come from, he said we are absolutely not going to discuss that. So we didn't. Okay, so now he says with that, and that will say that come from a government, from a bond dealer, and that ended up in his bank. So now he's got $1,000. So now he can then loan $900, and he takes $100 and keeps it in his bank for reserves. So now you have $100 reserve here and $900 worth of loans. Now he says then when this guy writes a check on this and it goes into the next bank, now that bank, number 2 bank, and he's got it all listed here, and I'll pass it around a little bit and let you look at it. He has bank 2 here. Now it has $900 in the deposit, so it can hold $90 over here in its reserves, and it can loan out $810.